Our media are corrupt when it comes to communist China. Our entertainment industry is corrupt. Much of our broadcast industry is corrupt. We have politicians who are corrupt, government officials who are corrupt, right into the White House and so forth and so on. It really is daunting. The book is Blood Money. You can get it at Amazon.com, any major bookstore. It's out right now. It's #1 on Amazon for a reason. It's because what's between the covers. And when you look, Peter Schweitzer, at these various companies that are doing business with communist China, I mean, the question becomes which companies aren't, not which companies are. There was a time in our history when companies were patriotic. They wouldn't do business with the Third Reich, obviously Japan after they attacked us and so forth and so on. The question becomes, when Kissinger said we need to open up to China, bring them into our capitalist system and so forth, seems to me we've come into their system. And they're able to destroy certain of our corporations. They're able to blackmail. You even have the NBA and others where these players speak out for civil liberties. They claim to, except, of course, when it comes to China and their profits and their sneakers. This is going to be very, very difficult to reverse, isn't it?
It is, because a lot of the powerful forces in this country that have economic power and political power don't want to change to the status quo. You're exactly right, Mark. The bargain we made with China going back to the early 90s was if we engage with them economically, they're going to become more like us. The sad fact is we become more like them. We are now censoring ourselves, or at least large companies are censoring themselves because they don't want to offend China. I have a chapter in the book on Hollywood and how the Hollywood studios, in this mad rush to get Chinese money, to get access to the Chinese market, give the Chinese Ministry of Propaganda veto power over what is in films, and with some really shocking results. And the problem is that what these companies will say is, well, we're just doing this because it's the bottom line profit, where, of course, they don't make the same argument when it comes to these diversity issues. Then it's all about doing the right thing. But when it comes to China, it's no longer about doing the right thing. We are going to reach a day of reckoning in this country, I think, where this is going to become the core question upon which our future pivots. And that is, are we going to allow American elites to continue to do this? Because let's face it, Mark, these large companies that do business deals with China and who say we aren't American companies anymore, when their bacon's in the fryer, when their employees are held hostage overseas, are they calling the UN? Are they calling the Chinese? They're calling the United States government, expecting them to help them. If they're having a problem, a legal problem internationally, they're expecting our criminal justice system to help them. So we need to remind them, no, you are American companies, and we don't have a problem with you operating overseas, but when it leads you to help our enemies, when it leads you to undermine our principles, then it's gone too far. And I think that day of reckoning is coming. Let's remember when Donald Trump enacted tariffs on the Chinese when he was president of the United States. The Chinese did not go to Washington, D.C. to lobby the Trump administration. They went to Silicon Valley, they went to Wall Street, and they said, you guys go and lobby the Trump administration. And those industries dutifully did. That's what's going on in the country, and that has to change.
And that has to change, and I agree with that. You mentioned Hollywood in the few minutes we have left, but it's more than Hollywood, isn't it? It's our mass media. These are major international corporations, most of whom do business. Look at NBC, owned by Comcast, and the Olympics. They were not allowed to say anything negative about communist China, and they didn't. All throughout the Olympics, they didn't say a word. So our media are corrupt when it comes to communist China. Our entertainment industry is corrupt. Much of our broadcast industry is corrupt. We have politicians who are corrupt, government officials who are corrupt, right into the White House and so forth and so on. It really is daunting. But let's just quickly, in the few minutes we have left, let's talk about the American media. They do have ties to communist China because they're now own most of these platforms by these massive conglomerates, no?
That's exactly right. Disney obviously owns ABC. Disney does a lot of business in China. Disney changes content in its films so they don't offend China. Same thing with NBC. You've got Universal, of course, which has theme parks. They want to do business in China. You look at an outfit like the New York Times, partly owned by Carlos Slim. Carlos Slim has investments in China. The list goes on and on and on. And the problem is, Mark, is that if these entities were being consistent and telling us all the time it's about the bottom line, I guess you could say, okay, I don't agree with them, but at least they're being consistent. The problem is these are the very institutions, including academe, that lecture us all the time on some perceived or claimed moral authority, whether it's race issues, whether it's economic issues, whether it's quote unquote equity issues. They lecture us with a certain moralism because they deem themselves to be these moral actors. Well, the great issue of our time is China, whether it's human rights, whether it's fentanyl, whether it's the things that are going on around the world, slavery, it is China. And on that issue, the most important, largest issue where you're actually talking about human lives, these voices are absolutely silent. So I think we need to remind them, and we need to remind our friends, these organizations, these entities have zero moral authority, because it's as if somebody, during the 1850s in the United States was lecturing and sermonizing, but didn't want to say a thing about slavery. Nobody would take them seriously in their moralism, and we should not take these entities serious in any of their moralizing either.
For more, sign up for Levin TV.